Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this another series of webinar. It's the last ITC webinar before the conference in Auckland. So I hope to see everyone in Auckland in a month from now. And here today we have Filip de Fruyt, the professor from Ghent University. Thank you so much, Filip, for accepting this invitation and being here this morning to talk about assessing vocational interests and personality, individual differences, and so forth. Filip de Fruyt is a senior full professor of differential psychology and social personality assessment at Ghent University in Belgium, where he leads research on how individuals differ and how those differences unfold across education and work contexts. He holds the chair at Ghent by Institute Ayrton Senna, focused on assessment and development of social emotion and employability skills in youth. With over 30 years of research spanning personality, vocational interest, and large-scale psychometric assessment, he is one of the most influential researchers at the intersection of individual difference and applied psychological assessment. So welcome to this webinar, Filip. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Felipe, for this nice introduction, and thank you so much to ITC for inviting me for this presentation. As already announced, today I will talk about two sets of constructs that are really to the heart of the research work that I've been doing the past years together with a broad group of people. At one side, vocational interests, and at the other side, social, emotional, and behavior skills, or skills in general, as you want. And I love to apply this and both from an education perspective, so how these two sets of individual differences constructs are interesting by themselves at the level of schools, but also I will try to argue and give you a couple of examples why they are also important for the work environment. As Felipe already mentioned, I'm connected to Ghent University, which is in Belgium. So for me, it's afternoon, and I imagine that you guys are from very different parts of the world, morning, afternoon, or evening. So welcome to everyone. Here you see the map of Belgium. It's a very, very small country centered around Brussels. I'm in the northern part, near the North Sea, in the Flemish-speaking part of the country. And we love chocolate, as many of you know. We also have a preference for beers, and we also like a lot Belgian fries, not French fries. I prefer to call them Belgian fries. And these are preferences or interests of people, but of course you also need the skill to prepare good chocolate, to select the right hops to make beer, and then also you need particular skills to make Belgian fries that are soft at the inside, but crispy at the outside. So that's a little bit of a short introduction that preferences and interests of people often need to be matched with skills that are in charge or that can be applied in a particular field. And today I will talk a little bit about the intersection between these two. So when I started preparing for the talk this afternoon, I thought about give you a little bit of background because I understood that most of you have very, very different backgrounds. There are people who are working more for large-scale educational assessments. Others are interested in the labor market and how to help people on the labor market and help people within organizations. So I'll start with giving a little background how I came to these two topics and how I came in particularly interested in the intersection between these two. And everything to this kind of topic and to the interest in this kind of topic goes back to two types of questions. I call them the what, where question. That is answered, what will people do? Where will they spend their time and their energy? Part of that is described by vocational interests. And then already for a long time, people have been interested in how people perform. And how people perform, that's probably reflected by their skill level. And then I will show you a study and explain you a little bit how you can look at the intersection between the two, and then take some concluding comments. And of course, if you have questions in the meantime, please send them in the chat. And I will take some time or reserve some time at the end of the talk to deal with questions, or you can send me your questions later on. So let me start with give you a few examples of the world of school, and then a couple of examples of the world of work where actually interests and skills come together. Let me start with this example, which within a couple of days, I have my exam here. I'm teaching a course in differential psychology for our first-year students. And after the exam, a couple of weeks later, they can come and see the professor and get feedback on their results. And then a first-year student, and that I can predict that happened to me the past years, and that will happen to me again within a couple of weeks. The student will say, I like following your class, and I found the subject interesting. So that's a clear reference to interest in a particular subject. But then me as a professor, if they come to the feedback, usually they failed the exam. And then I will say, well, I don't see this reflected in your exam results. So the student says, I have an interest, and then you try to evaluate how they perform in a particular field, and that reflects ability or reflects skills. So the question is, can interests, for example, compensate for lack of skill? So that's a kind of typical example in an educational context. But let me give you another one. A couple of years ago, I got involved in a project at our medical faculty where they said, well, Filip, we have a problem in the course of the program, because in the 5th year, they need to select and choose a medical specialization. And you have some of these students who start studying medicine, and after 5 years, they don't have any idea in what kind of area they will specialize. But you also have students, and the situation I'm describing here is an example of this, who initially dream about being a cardiologist, but then they do a kind of internship, and that didn't work at all for them. They felt bad. Probably they had not a good relationship with the internship supervisor and so on. So I always wanted to become a cardiologist, but that internship went so bad that I want to reconsider my options. I'm even questioning my abilities and skills to work as a doctor. So you see, they have always had a particular interest, but for one or another reason, that's off the desk. And then they start even questioning their abilities and skills, despite the fact that they already studied successfully for 5 years. And then they say, please help me to choose something else, or what should I do? So this is a question that I call these cases, people in the swamp. They question both the direction where they want to go, the what, where question, and they question also their skill levels. A third example comes from the work environment. Sometimes I'm coming into organizations where the supervisor is saying, well, Cassie has been a solid and reliable contributor to our team the past years, and she gets along well with everyone. And there's an opening for a team leader in the team, and then the supervisor is saying, well, she will be interested in a new job opening of team leader. The question is, can we make inferences about interests relying on people's skill levels? So Cassie clearly is someone who is well in the team and who seems to have the skill to get along well with other people, but it's not really sure that we can make a claim that she will be interested in a leadership position. And then finally, my final answer is also work-related. An employee can come to you in a career counseling situation saying, I still love my current job, but want to make a next step in the organization. And the next step in the organization requires that you lead a team. The critical question is then, fine, that you want to make this move, but do you also have the skills to lead? You have an interest in the work, but becoming a leader is still something else and probably requires other skills. So the interconnection between interests and skills is really an important one. Yeah. So if I look on at what is happening in academia, but also in the big surveys, I see that there's a lot of attention for skills. That topic and that set of constructs received a lot of attention the past years. But I think that the what question is also a very important one, and that's rather neglected. And certainly the intersection between skills and interests is a neglected area. And if I have one objective of this session is really try to convince you that both are important, and that if we design studies or if we design implementation programs for the labor market or for education, that we need to cover both and not one or the other. Yeah, I'll try to give some extra arguments when I go into the two different topics separately. So let me start with skills. So how people work, we have been interested in organizations on this for a very, very long time. Initially, we called it competencies. We had job advertisements listing a set of competencies, and these competencies more and more are replaced now. They call it skills. For me, there's not a big difference between a competency and a skill. It's just a matter of vocabulary. But there was a lot of discussion on the kind of skills that are really important to develop, not only in education, but also in our organizations and on the labor market. All the attention for skills actually came from the idea, 21st century skill thinking, that we need to deal with what was called the VUCA world, at that time volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. We are busy with multiple things at a time. We bump up in the morning in traffic jams. People were busy on Twitter, called X now. In the meantime, we also need to take care about the environment. But I think that there have been challenges across time. Even in ancient times, people had their challenges. And then they were busy with protecting themselves. They were busy with finding food and all different sorts of other stuff. And I think that we are really equipped evolutionary to deal with problems. The last picture I'm showing you is a picture that my mother always reminded me. My mother was coming from a very poor family in the period just after the Second World War, that there was not that much food for people here. And then to stimulate the cognitive development of the children in schools in Belgium, the children of the poor families, and you can see it on the picture, they had to line up. And then one of the teachers was giving them a spoon with the fat of a whale, because that included nutrition elements that were interesting and good for their cognitive development. Can you imagine? That's 2 generations ago here in Belgium. I always show this kind of picture to my students just to remind them that there have been challenges at all times. Yeah. And some years ago, the OECD got interested in assessing skills. So the same people who were busy with interesting projects since the year 2000, like PISA, where they evaluated knowledge of languages, of math, later on STEM subjects. About 13 to 14 years ago, they got interested in assessing skills as well. Do students in Singapore have more developed collaboration skills, for example, compared to collaboration in France or collaboration in Brazil or another country? And the OECD invited a couple of people, including Oliver John, my colleague from Berkeley in California, and myself. And we came up with a kind of a taxonomy that actually refers to 5 psychosocial systems that connect with skills. If you go to societies around the world, and I already had the opportunity to peek a little bit in some of your questions, and some questions are about cross-cultural generalizability of this kind of material. Well, cross-culturally, you will see that in almost every culture, these 5 systems, or at least you can observe these 5 systems. In each culture, people are busy with designing skills or with developing skills in terms of how to live together or how to work with others. The fact that we showed up right on time, my time, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, for Filip in the morning in Brazil, and for some other people in the evening, this is really, we set up, we try to connect with each other, we try to bond with each other. A lot of what psychology is doing is really trying to connect people. People who get depressed, for example, they do not only have many negative emotions, but they also got isolated, have less energy, and we really want that people are in close bonds. So living together and work with others is a very horizontal kind of interpersonal skill set. The second system is if you bring people together, you see that you have people who follow and you have people who take the lead and a big bunch of people who are somewhere in between. And all kinds of skills that relate to this. Yeah. So this is a kind of approach, a reward-driven system. Those of you who are from the personality psychology area, the 2 dimensions I was describing, living together, work with others, connected to belonging, this is what we would call in personality individual differences in terms of agreeableness, whereas lead follows, being sensitive to status hierarchy. This is really introversion versus extroversion, or interpersonal skills related to more hierarchical positions or follower positions. Standard start and act, getting standards. The fact that we started right on time and will finish right on time is a good example of getting standards. We organize our societies in terms of particular standards, so we will have developed, or we will develop skills that have to do with this. And you see that also reflected in individual differences that have to do with what personality psychologists would call conscientiousness. Then a 4th system is conserve and explore. We need to adapt in societies. I just gave you a couple of examples, more recent challenges that we are facing in the world and across the world, but also hundreds and hundreds of years ago we were facing. So we need exploratory systems. So that connects to openness, to innovation, and all skills related to that. And then a 5th set of important skills will help us to deal with frustration and setbacks. Each one of us during his or her life will have to deal with frustration, will have to deal with setbacks. You can be fired in your job, you can get sick, some of us go through a divorce, some of us go sometimes through some form of unemployment. that all affects us, and we need skills that help us to deal with this. So emotion regulation, coping is also a very big skill group. So these 5, what we would call psychosocial systems, connect to 5 broad groups of skills. And if you go into the literature and you plug in whatever kind of browser system, 21st century skills or skills for the future or skills for the labor market, you will get all these different types of wish lists that are interesting by themselves to look at. But the OECD got completely confused by this, and they said, we want to have it all. And as you can see on the slide here, some of these systems have 4 skills. The 4 C's model, for example, of 21st century skills: critical thinker, communicator, collaborator, and creator, whereas other systems had 120 skills. So if you want to assess skills across the world in comparative research, what kind of model do you need to use? So after a lot of reading, we summarized this kind of literature and nailed it down in a model that formed actually the starting point of a lot of research by individual research groups, but also by the OECD, who used this model as a starting point. And you see the core of the model here that refers actually to the 5 systems I was talking about 5 minutes ago to you. Emotion regulation, I stopped with that box, and then we picked out 3 skills there. Then the more interpersonal kind of skills, engaging with others and collaboration, reflecting more to the frequency of social interaction versus the quality of social interaction. Then open-mindedness, and then the more conscientious task performance-oriented skill set. So this kind of model is actually a kind of the largest common denominator that you can find among very different skill models. You see it here reflected in a different way, and we also wrote a paper, one of my postdocs, Luz Abrahams, together with some of my international colleagues, also from the Institute Ayrton Senna and Educational Testing Service, Pat Kilonen, but Ricardo Primi and Daniel Santos from Brazil, and Oliver, of course, from Berkeley. That entire group wrote a paper on this kind of model, where it comes from and how it connects to lexical models like the personality Big Five. Yeah. So I think the elegancy of a model is that it gives you a little bit of direction in terms of, if the question comes in, what skills we need to teach or what skills we need to develop in our organizations, then at least you have a comprehensive model that gives you direction. This is not saying that you need to follow this model like it is, but at least you can say, for example, in our curriculum, we need to pick some skills out of these 5 boxes. Yeah, rather than if you bring people together and you say to them, what kind of skills you find important, everyone comes with his own system or his own dadas, so to say, whereas here you have a guarantee that you better cover what is necessary, not only in education, but also at the level of the labor market. Yeah. You can read more about that. Some years ago, together with Chris Soto and Rebecca Scheiner, we did an annual review chapter where we covered several of these models. This is an unpublished table that actually should have made it into this document, but due to page restrictions, could not be covered there. But I'm very happy to share the slides with you. So if you want them, send me an email and I can send you. But this shows the OECD model, but also several competing models. Well, competing is maybe not the right word. Each of these models has its value, of course, and is developed from a particular context. But the Castle group is very, very influential, has a wonderful website, has a long history of doing this kind of research. And you really see that their dimensions also fit the 5 broad groups that the OECD proposed and that we proposed. Character strengths, same story. Together with my Brazilian colleagues and the Institute Ayrton Senna, we designed the Senna inventory, and also there you see these 5 main skill sets coming back. Then Chris Soto, together with Brent Roberts and Napolitano, they designed Bessie. I'll come back to that later. And that is also the same model behind it. So they designed a skill model starting actually from the lexical Big 5. So you really see that there's across all these different backgrounds, there's consensus on the model. Yeah. So here you see the model by Soto et al., where you immediately recognize the 5 main boxes. And of course, because it's about doing stuff, skills is really about performance, you see that self-management in the center is a little bit broader than the others. Yeah, but you recognize the 5 patterns also in here. So as a summary and introduction for the skill piece, there's progress and we have consensus on the broad taxonomy to use. There's still some conceptual discussion. Some people advocate more for a kind of typical performance operationalization of a skill, whereas people like Soto argue more for a kind of maximal performance operationalization. How well can you do a skill when the situation calls for it? And that's a typical measurement element that they use to examine a maximal. How well can you do? That refers to your self-description of a maximal performance, whereas a more typical performance assessment is how you do in general. Yeah, and there's still some discussion what is the most optimal level, probably depending on the kind of outcome you're interested in. Probably sometimes the more maximal performance operationalization will win, whereas for other predictors or types of prediction, a more typical kind of skill level could do the job. But of course, both are connected. But conceptually, that difference is still made. At the level of assessment, we still stick to self-reports because in these large-scale studies, we want to assess a lot of these skills. So if you need to assess a couple of skills from these 5 containers, then of course self-reports where you try to work with multiple raters. You can, if it's about students, you can ask the students themselves, but you can ask also the teachers to rate the students. And you can ask the parents to rate the students, but it's still a rating process. Yeah. So with all the difficulties in terms of ratings, currently there are developments to go beyond self-reports, but still, even the situational judgment test is also a self-report. Yeah. And more objective kind of tests usually take a lot of time that you need to assess a single skill. So for now, we still use a lot of self-reports, and we have good tools available. So this is all about skills. So in terms of vocational interests, in terms of what people will do and where people will study or where people will work, I really think that this is a critical question, especially nowadays, because, okay, you can talk about the skills, but a big question is, where people will allocate their time. My father worked for his entire life in the same factory almost, and he did a couple of different jobs there, but it was all very, very close to each other. Yeah, this is nowadays probably completely unthinkable that people will spend their entire career in a single organization in more or less the same function. So how to navigate on the labor market in terms of what we will do and where we will work will become a critical issue. You cannot develop your skills in what I would call a vacuum. You always do it in a certain context. So that's the reason why I'm so interested also in learning about the vocational sectors where people develop and will end up in and will move in or leave and come in other places. So I really think that we need to invest in interest assessment. And the past years, I started together with some of my colleagues a small startup, Lowlands Assessment Systems. You see the logo down, where we designed a tool that can be used for interest assessment, because often there's a kind of misconception that people know well what they like. Usually, if you ask people, what do you like? They have an answer. They will tell you something. But that's a narrow kind of conception. Often they think about what they have studied or the kind of job that they currently do, and then they say, well, something like this. Yeah. Whereas interests of people could be much, much, much broader. So I really think that we need to learn people to reconsider and explore their interests in depth across time in their career. Not every year, of course, but every 5, 6, or 7 years, it's interesting to explore your interests in depth. That will be necessary because new jobs will come on the labor market, where we do not necessarily see the connection. If you do not have a background framework to look at these new realities, to look at these new jobs, then it is very, very hard to see similarities between what you do today and between what that new job requires or offers you. You need a kind of language to do this. And maybe we, as psychologists and people interested in this kind of area, we have models to look at this, but the people in the street, they don't have this kind of model. So I think that will require professional expertise, that will require assessment. So yes, that's good news for us. And also we will have to reconsider the idea of fit. Most of us are thinking in terms of getting a kind of optimal fit. And fit is a dynamic construct. Fit, you can have fit today, but the job may not fit within 5 years anymore. The job can change, but you can change yourself too. Yeah. So fit is, first of all, a dynamic construct. And we will also have to think about helping people with dealing with less fit. There are more and more studies that show, for example, we have a lot of people with social interests and a lot of people with artistic interests. Well, if you look at the labor market, at the level of studying and at the level of educational majors, a lot of people study something with arts or study something with the social component. But if at the level of the labor market, there's a lot of realistic practical jobs, technical stuff, IT, enterprising is an important element, or conventional is an important element, you get a kind of mismatch. So it's not always that we need to think about an optimal fit. It's more about getting a kind of realistic fit in terms of what is possible. Yeah. So that's a little bit stuff to keep in mind. And of course, we can rely on a big history. Those of you who are familiar with vocational interest assessment, we have John Holland's model. Holland was an army psychologist who did a lot of interviews with young people who had to be reoriented and oriented in the American army. And he discovered that people's interests actually reflected, he called it at that time 6 types, but I don't like the term type. I prefer to call it a domain, 6 domains of interests, and people more or less resemble 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe all 6 to a certain extent. Yeah. And the same kind of model you can use for describing environment. So you have a kind of commensurate model that you can use to describe the person and describe the environment. And if you bring the 2 together, that's the entire idea of fit. Yeah. So you have a Ryesack profile that is assessed at the level of the person, and then you can match it to RIASEC profiles of environments. Yeah, so that's a very elegant model. So he distinguished between more the realistic domain vis-a-vis the social domain. So that's more doing activities that have a thing or a nature kind of character versus doing stuff with people. Yeah, or rules versus more creativity, following rules, quality control, being an activities as an accountant, as a lawyer, versus the very creative part, like being a painter or an artist. And then enterprising vis-a-vis of versus investigative, people who think versus the more action-oriented people. So you see that these 6 domains have a certain connection, and that's why they are called the hexagon model. And that has all different sorts of implications in terms of what you can do with this model. So together with 2 of my friends and colleagues, the person below is Bart Wille, who is a colleague, professor here, a former postdoc of mine here also at our university. And the one on top is Sjoerd Dingeman. So we designed Lola because we are working here in the Netherlands and Belgium. And this group of countries is also sometimes called the lowlands. We created a new product building on the legacy of Holland, where we included a couple of interesting new features to it. I will not go into detail. If you want to learn more about it, please visit our website, and then you will get all the details. The only thing I want to explain a bit today is that we try to capture a little bit better the heterogeneity within the traditional Holland domains. For example, in realistic, we prefer to call it practical. We distinguished 3 main sections in this container. Hands-on activities, people working with the tools, outdoor kind of activities and sports, and then also more technical, the construction work, working with big machinery. These are all realistic, practical types of activities. And we assess them also at 2 different levels. A more superficial level, oh yeah, that's interesting, I want to do this, but also at a more advanced and what we would call a more anchored type of level. I still want to do it, even when there are negative elements connected to it. For example, when outdoor, today in Belgium, for once, it's good weather. And if you would ask today to people, do you love gardening? Many people will say yes. Yeah, I love gardening. But you can also ask people, do you love gardening when it's raining? And then a lot of less people, of course, will say yes to that. If you still say yes to the second item, that's called an anchored interest. Yeah. So investigative, we have 3 pieces there as well. Physics, sciences. If you love the STEM kind of sciences, if you love abstract theories, and the entire ICT business as well. In artistic, we have 2 types of activities there. Appreciating art, and then what we would call the kind of home and kitchen creativity. For example, it's someone's anniversary, and either you can buy, people low on this will buy a kind of coupon and give it to the people, whereas people who are creative, they will design something, or they will invent a nice present for the person. In social, we have 2 types of activities. Traditionally, what is conceived as care, where the other person is very central. But there's another type of social activity, which is more related to education and instruction, where often you are more in charge. For example, most of us who work as teachers or as professors, we have an education and instruction function. We stand in front of an audience. The core is also, and the center are also other people, but we do it in a kind of different relationship to them. In enterprising, we have 4 components: leadership, organizing, the more commercial element, we called it scoring, and then be good or be interested in status and power. People who score high on the last element there, on that last component, they love the more strategic play in organizations. Seldomly you will find entrepreneurs who are interested in 4 of these. And then finally, conventional, the traditional kind of thing, working with structure, with rules, and then also be good in terms of keeping an eye on the money, having a business orientation, project management, and stuff like this. So that gives you this kind of picture. We still report at the RIASEC level, as you can see, and you would be inclined to say, well, there's not that much happening at the level of realistic, investigative, and artistic, but in our system, you see that with the refined structure of interests, that realistic shows differentiation, investigative as well, and also at the artistic level. Yeah, so you get much more information that can help you, and so you can fine tune it. So the summary of for interest is that I think interests made a comeback in IO psychology, but not as strong as I would like to see it. We have different models. We have the RIASEC model. My colleague Rong Su recently, a couple of years ago, introduced the set point model, and that's also a very valuable way to look at interests, at basic interest skills, and so on. But I still see the field of interests absent in the big surveys on skills. I still see the idea of vocational interests not present in career orientation enough. Primarily focusing, one is primarily focusing there on skills, and the same for talent management programs in organizations. It's very focused on skills, on competencies, and I would argue to focus on skills and interests. So what about the intersection? So we have 2 key intertwined questions, the what and the how question. If we agree that these are the 2 main questions that we need to think about, not only how people perform, but they perform always in a context. Yeah. So we need to keep these central in, for example, human resources, but also if we want to get our people making a smooth connection between studies and the labor market. We have 2 good models. We have seen that 5 cluster model for skills and the RIASEC model, and we have good inventories to assess them. And then we can try to predict 3 types of performance criteria. Task performance, this is what is in your function description. Contextual performance, that's more interpersonal performance, how you deal with the team and how you are in a team. And adaptive performance is really something that reflects how flexible you are, what is not in your task description and what is not covered in the team, how adaptive you are to all different sorts of changes that are happening. For example, all at once, your job, the company is temporarily closed because COVID comes in, you need to work from home. How adaptive you are in dealing with these kind of challenges. Another example is how you get a new boss, a new supervisor, how flexible and adaptive you are in dealing with this. Yeah. So we'll show you some data. We have more data to come. And those of you who will make it to Auckland, I hope to be in a position to tell you a little more on extra data at the ITC conference. For the moment, I will share some of the data I collected with psychology students. We have Bessie, we administered Lola, we collected self-descriptions on the skills, we collected self-descriptions on the interests, and then we also asked them to appoint a person who knew the students well to provide ratings on task performance, contextual performance, and on adaptive performance. So first of all, let us look at the correlations. So you really see that there are certain connections. For example, self-management from skills from Bessie is strongly connected, 0.53, with conventional interest. Social engagement is connected to enterprising strongly, but also to social interest. So you see a connection with social and with enterprising. Cooperation, reflecting more quality kind of interpersonal quality skills, is connected to the social environment. Emotion regulation cuts across several investigative, social, enterprising, and conventional, and then innovation is strongly associated with artistic interests, but also with investigative interests, also with enterprising. So there is a kind of connection, and there is certainly overlap between skills. Think about the kind of examples I started with in the talk. There's certainly a connection between skills and between interests. If then you try to bring them together in a regression model where you try to predict task performance, contextual performance, and adaptive performance, you really need to make specific hypotheses where you connect specific skills with a particular type of interest. Let's, for example, look at contextual, where we looked at main effects of Bessie. We made a compound score there of social engagement and cooperation skills. And we interacted that with social and compound of social and enterprising interests assessed by Lola. So we looked at main effects of the two compounds and interactive effects. The same for adaptive, where we used Bessie innovation connected or interacting with Lola, a compound of Lola, investigative and artistic. And if we looked at task performance, we looked at the interaction between Bessie self-management and Lola conventional. In terms of the data, as you can see here, none of the interactive effects was significant. And there were main effects, not from the interests, but there were main effects of the skills for contextual performance and for task performance. You see self-management skill is actually quite a good predictor of task performance and the perception of other people. But we didn't pick up, at least in this sample, any interactive effects. Yeah. So being able and being willing, if you talk to people outside of academia, they usually use this kind of language. Are you willing to do it? That's reflecting the interest. Are you able to do it? That is reflecting the skill level. There are main effects on task and contextual for skills, no main effects on performance for interests, no interactive effects. Of course, in terms of what I showed you, there are a bunch of limitations. It's a student sample. It's a small sample, 150 people. It's rated performance. It's not an objective indicator, but it's a rated 3 different types of performance that are rated. You could also argue you need to include other criteria. For example, there will certainly, if you would have included satisfaction, job satisfaction, or study satisfaction, and turnover outcomes, probably there would be main effects of interest on that. So it gives us a little bit of an idea where the intersection is. There's overlap, but let me come to the conclusions. I think in many studies and in many of the approaches and policy discussions, there's an emphasis on skills. I would sometimes call it an overemphasis. I would love to see that moving into, it's a discussion on skills and interests together. Whether they add to each other, whether there's a kind of Matthew effect, or whether lack of the one can compensate for the other, I think we need more research. Together with my Brazilian colleagues, we are collecting now data sets in education, where we will be able to examine some of these questions on a much, much larger scale. We also need to look at the broader set of criteria that go beyond rated performance. Another important issue is to keep in mind is that both sets of constructs are undergoing changes. That's certainly true for interests. If you look at all the new activities that people can do that can be related in IT, look at all new jobs that are coming in that have to do with the environment and stuff. Look at all the new jobs that are created at the cross-section of techniques and engineering and medicine. This is really a booming set of activities. So by definition, we will need to update that in our interest inventories, but also at the level of skills, there will be changes. Yeah. So I think there are very big challenges for each of us. We really need to bring attention for these two sets of constructs in education, but from education also to the labor market. That will form the core of talent management, I think, in organizations. In Western Europe, where I come from, but I'm traveling a lot and also doing international consultancy, I see that also in many, many other businesses across the world, people want to keep workforce within the organization. It costs a lot to hire new people. You're not always sure that you will find them on the labor market. So there's a lot to say to design a good talent management system in your organization where people can develop. So you will need to look at their vocational interests in association with their skill levels. Yeah. And also, even when they leave organizations, these two individual differences constructs will be very, very important so people can navigate in their individual careers. As I said before, it is unlikely that people will start in a job and will stay in that job for 10 years. People will, across their career, that will last maybe 40 or 45 or even 50 years, they will need to make multiple changes. So we need to equip them with good models so they can look at what they like to do and what they are good at, yeah? And how to connect these two. So that's the reason why I think the intersection of vocational interests and skills deserves our attention, and that we should study that and do a big effort and elaborate on this kind of stuff. So I'm ready for your questions. Thank you so much. So here you see a couple of the people who helped me with in the team with designing all this, and some people from the Senna Institute in front of the race car, and then the other gang are the young people here in our lab, and Shuming helped me with the data analysis, and Joyce in the right corner helped me with collecting the data. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Filip, again for your really inspiring presentation. For me, it's a very interesting topic, working on skills, social-emotional skills, and vocational interests as well. And it's very nice to have you here and listen to your words about how to interacting skills and interests throughout the lifespan. For those that will attend the conference in ITC conference in Auckland, we will have a symposium or oral presentation. Filip, Christopher Nye, myself, and two another Brazilian researcher, Gustavo and Leonardo, we will present a symposium about vocational interest in schools and work environment. So it'll be very interesting to have you in Auckland as well. And now we have some time for questions. We do have some questions from the audience. If you have questions, then you have to, and you can put up your question on the chat, and we'll read them. But we also have some questions from the pre-registered members. But before to go to those questions, I do have one other question that came up in my mind through your presentation, Philip. And it's interesting that you mentioned your father expanded his entire career in the same company. Is not that big a difference from my father as well. And is this a reality for our fathers? But it's far from what we have now. But vocational interests theories were larger developed and a much more stable world, more different dynamic world. But given how rapidly the labor market is changing, do you think our theoretical models should be fundamental revised or be accounted for those dynamism? You kind of answered my question saying about your Lola model, but I would like to, if you could go deep on this question. Should we revise our interest models entirely, or maybe adapt how do we assess interest in a more dynamical world?
Yeah, that's an important, a very important question. I certainly think that as I ended the presentation, I said the activities that are around will have to be updated. Yeah. And then it's an empirical question whether you need a different structure to better represent the structure of these activities or not. For example, the work done by my American colleagues and Rong-Su and many others, they came with the idea of a kind of more hierarchical model. So I think this is really interesting to think about. At the same time, they also keep the connection to RIASEC because it's a very dominant model. We know a lot what works, but what does not work or does not replicate well. But we see some problems too. And so it's really interesting to see these new models come up, new ways to organize that. And I certainly encourage everyone to have a close look at these kind of new developments. I will certainly follow these. And a couple of weeks ago at the SIOP conference in New Orleans, there were a couple of interesting presentations that went in this direction, where they also organized vocational job titles in ONET according to these new systems. So there's a lot going on there. And I think it's an empirical, first it's an empirical question if new structures come up. If one is sometimes saying garbage in, garbage out, but if you plug in new stuff, a different structure can come out of this. Yeah. So this is something I think which is a big issue for the future. Second part of your question is that I also think that we need to think fit as a dynamic kind of construct. That's a really important piece. What fits today for you is not necessarily even in the same circumstances. If the context is not changing and you are not changing, your private situation can change. You can get two kids and so there are floating pieces as well around the job and around you as a person. Yeah. And so fit is a dynamic thing, and that should be better reflected in our research designs. And then 3 is that we should not always think in terms of achieving a higher fit. You see, sometimes achieving a smaller fit can also help us in learning something new. I think if there's a too big gap between what you like and what you and the kind of situation you are in, then learning will not happen, because that's a bridge too far, so to speak. Yeah. But at least having a little bit of difference in between these two can help you, depending on your personality, of course. If you're anxious and closed-minded, well, that will inhibit. So you could throw in personality here as well, in addition to skill and to interests. And in this case, openness and anxiety or neuroticism could be moderators, of how fit could work, if you move and if you learn or not. And so I really think that we should go into these dynamics. And the fourth thing is that here we will need to introduce that's a practical constraint that I see. If you're talking about these two topics to people, they have difficulty in integrating two models. You see, you have that skill model with that 5 containers, and if you are in an organization and they pick only 3 skills out of 3 of the 5 containers, many people think that they are working with another model. No. You just are picking 3 skills that you will implement in your organization and try to develop your people on in the organization. This is not saying that the model is wrong. This is actually what I try to show you with the model of Castle and character strengths and all the others. If you bring them together, there's so much overlap. And they can be classified, and the big chunk can be captured by these 5 broad domains. But if you need to introduce 2 types of individual differences constructs, people are mix up and think they can't we integrate all this in one model? Can't we integrate RIASEC and the skill model in one thing? And that's the reason why I try to think about 2 different conceptual ways to introduce it, and to start also with giving the examples to people. You might have the interest but lack the skill. Can the one compensate for the other? You see? Or don't make too much assumptions that couldn't be empirically supported. Saying someone has the skill in working in a team and have a good position in a team, this is not, can we infer from that you will be interested in a leadership position, or the other way around. So if we look at the correlation matrix, there's some overlap. Correlations of 0.5, 0.6 at certain levels show that 20%, that there may be 20% overlap, but it also means that there's a lot of unique variance at the level of skills and a lot of unique variance at the level of interests. You see, and that's a difficulty in explaining these 2 models to policy people. They would love to have one model that captures both of these things, whereas I think that these are connected, slightly overlapping but distinct types of individual differences. I sometimes in differential psychology we call them the big 4: personality, interests, and values and abilities. So there's some overlap between these things. For some, the overlap is very minimal between abilities and personality, for example. That's very limited, and for others, that's more. But there are distinct sets of constructs, distinct models behind it. And that's the big issue, to bring that to an applied audience. If you need to convince your customers of it, or education, or businesses.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. And we still have time for one question.
Good.
I show here, as it's from the members. They sent the question: how can educators identify gaps or effectively assess in the social emotional of learners across diverse cultures?
Yeah, that's that's still a big question, I guess, where we don't have all the answers yet. So initially, also when the OECD started with assessing skills, the initial idea was not to make comparisons like they do, for example, for PISA and much of the other things that they were examining. But yeah, implicitly, we thought immediately people will make this kind of comparison. And I in my introduction I gave it as an example. If you see data, if you are from Singapore and you can compare your data to Finland and to other countries, you by definition you make this kind of comparison. And we know with self-reports, all different sorts of answer biases are playing, and all different sorts of cultural effects can play. Yeah. And this is one element. The second element is that the importance of skills can vary across systems and across cultures as well. Like we know from the personality field. We know that a personality model can more or less fly in very different cultures, which is not saying that you can easily compare the mean scores, that you can bluntly compare mean scores on, for example, a personality inventory across countries, or even this kind of comparison is done even within countries. Yeah. Like the US, and try to connect, for example, to election results and so on and so forth. So making this kind of comparisons is really a big challenge, and certainly a topic that many of us in the International Test Commission are dealing with and still struggling with. There's no good answer on this. Of course, more objective types of assessment. Everyone wants this, and people are doing big efforts in doing that. But still, often it's confounded with abilities. I was criticizing a little bit these approaches using situational judgment tests because of that. But also, in a situational judgment test, you need then to come with relevant situations that fly across cultures and so on and so forth. So that does all these things does not make them comparable from one to the other country either. So it's still a big challenge there to really learn about how can we make this kind of cross-cultural comparisons. I think it's an important question, and I'm not overly optimistic that we will have solved that in 5 or 10 years. I think it will take us longer, yeah, if we like it or not. I'm following this field now for 15 to 20 years, and I haven't seen that much progress in this. We better know that we have to deal with all different sorts of answer tendencies. We learn there, and but it's all bits and pieces. And so far I haven't seen a real solution for all this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Philip, for being here today, explaining your research, your thoughts about social emotional skills and vocational interests as well. We really appreciate your time for today, and I hope you see you're all in Auckland for
Yep.
our ITC conference. Philip and I will be there. So thank you so much for the audience as well, and for those that will watch this video after on YouTube. Thank you so much, and have a nice day.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.